Hi, welcome to another Crazy Town bonus riff. And this time it's extra bonus because we've got Melody Allison, our incredible producer, here in studio.
Hello! We gotta be on our best behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm still not used to your new last name, I gotta be honest.
I am also not used to my new last name.
I bet.
It's a whole kerfuffle.
So Melody,
kerfuffle.
Melody has just moved to the Pacific Northwest from Austin, Texas, and she has brought the Austin weather with her up here. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
It's
I'm
not as
doing
bad
my
as
part.
Austin.
And we decided, the best way to welcome you is by giving you fires. And
Wow.
So, the air quality in Eugene is off the charts. In all kinds of ways.
I
Like
never
an ashtray.
smoked, and I think my lungs are too pink.
Yes.
So I think this is good for me.
You'll build up some.
Yeah, it's a toughening up process as you move in here. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad that you're here, Melody. You should feel free to fall asleep because we're boring, or pipe in. As things go, and you'll know exactly what to edit out because you'll be live here with all our ums and likes and yeahs and you knows, right?
If she edited that stuff out, our episodes would be like 4 minutes long.
Exactly.
I gotta keep it natural,
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, so I asked us to get together. We do these spontaneously, right?
Yeah.
Like combustion.
Like combustion, yeah. We could spend all the time talking about the heinous landscape that is outside the window here, Jason. It is a little dystopian.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I actually wanted to ask you guys, do you know about Baghdad Bob? Do you remember Baghdad Bob?
I totally remember Baghdad.
You do?
Yes.
I'm
Rob?
the least informed of us, so no, I have no idea who.
Never heard
Familiar
of
with
it.
Baghdad Bob?
No.
Okay. He also had another nickname, Chemical Ali, which is another name. So if you go online and search for Baghdad Bob, sometimes you might come across Chemical Ali instead. Both are probably pretty offensive names at this point, but this goes back to the very, very early days, the initial invasion of Iraq, the second time, right? The first one was,
I was around for that one. So
I was around.
That was a big deal.
We're talking 2003.
We're talking younger Bush, not the older Bush.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about Redux here.
Yeah.
Okay? So very early days, the U.S. military comes in, and a guy named Muhammad Saeed al-Sahaf.
Good job.
Hopefully is the right pronunciation. He was Saddam Hussein's information minister, at the time.
All right.
And his job was to get up there at a podium. You do these press conferences. There are these amazing clips of him outside, actually, giving press conferences, like at the Baghdad airport or different places around town. And his job was basically stand up there and say, everything you think is happening is not happening. Right? Like,
You cannot trust the Western media.
he got more and more extreme in his pronouncements, basically denying the reality that his country was basically slipping away from Saddam's power and grip on power. So he said things like, our initial assessment is that they will all die. He was very like propagandist in the beginning. They're not even within 100 miles of Baghdad. They're not in any place. They hold no place in Iraq. This is an illusion. They're trying to sell others an illusion. Of course, literally, like, the U.S. is entering into the streets of Baghdad while he's saying these things.
What did he say that day? They were actually pulling down the Saddam Hussein statue.
Exactly.
Statues are being erected all over the city.
My favorite was him saying, we have destroyed 2 tanks, fighter planes, 2 helicopters, and their shovels. We have driven them back.
Yeah.
Because that's all we came in with, right?
Yeah.
2 tanks, two helicopters.
I like that detail. And their shovels.
That's awesome.
And their shovels, yeah. So he became what, to me, was like the very first internet meme I can remember. And it's a little unfortunate to think about the giggles I probably had at the time, but it was just the juxtaposition of the reality of what this guy was saying was so extreme. So you could actually still find memes that people use to this day.
Was he saying stuff like, we have no weapons of mass destruction?
Right. Yeah, what a liar.
And what'd you say his name? His nickname was Alex Jones?
Exactly. Baghdad Bob is what people called him. So I was thinking about him because a couple of weeks ago I read this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Don't ask me why. I'm not a regular reader of the Wall Street Journal.
It was forwarded on. These things get passed around.
Yeah, somehow I got it. I think
it came to me too,
I think it was a collective exasperation on the...
I was checking my stock portfolio using the Wall Street Journal. That's how I came across it.
Yeah, nice. So there's this piece that was written by Alicia Finley. She's a member of their editorial board. And
the title says it all. I mean, I don't know if we have to go beyond this, but we will. It says, "Climate change obsession is a real mental disorder." That's the title.
That's the title of the piece.
Give that the strong lead.
Yeah.
I love that.
We could learn a few things from her in terms of titling things. So in the piece, she actually quotes from a Nature Journal article. And the quote is, "First and foremost, it is imperative that adults understand that youth climate anxiety is an emotionally and cognitively functional response to real existential threats." And then she said, "Although feelings of powerlessness, grief, and fear can be profoundly disruptive, particularly for young people unaccustomed to the depth and complexity of such feelings, it is important to acknowledge that this response is a rational one," right?
Okay, so she's quoting the Nature article here.
Yeah, but keep in mind, she's dismissing what the Nature article says.
Yeah. Well, she goes on to write that these anxieties are no more rational than the threats from climate change are existential. So just wave that hand, just deny all that science right away. A more apt term for such fear is climate hypochondria, which I'm just going to throw some kudos. That's pretty good writing.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Pretty good writing, but pretty awful.
Yeah, all the people that were in Maui, throwing themselves into the ocean, that was just hypochondria.
Yeah, well, hyperthermia is basically hypochondria. They're kind of the same.
Except the ocean's probably boiling. So it's,
How about this for the final line of that article? It ends with this. "Climate hypochondriacs deserve to be treated with compassion. Much like anyone who suffers from mental illness. They shouldn't, however, expect everyone else to enable their neuroses."
I'm going to try my best to treat her with compassion. It's not easy, but I am going to try to be as nice and compassionate with her and what she must be going through. This poor writer.
As she shows compassion in her piece.
Let me look up her name again. Her name is Alicia Finley. Oh, poor Alicia. This must be really hard for her.
She probably gets paid pretty well, actually.
It must be really hard for her, though, to be so disconnected from reality and to project so strongly onto others who have real feelings.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just have so much compassion for her.
Thanks for being so empathetic.
Yes. Okay.
I don't have that reaction at all.
So I'm gonna go through some of the things that she basically is referring to. She's also referring to like real statistics out there. She quotes a Lancet article. That's a British journal, I believe.
What are these crappy articles that she's looking at? She's looking in Nature. She's looking in Lancet.
Yes.
Like really low level.
And looking at them in order to dismiss them, right?
Well, because she's part of a journal that really comes from a economics profession background in business, so they know everything.
It's a true journal.
Well, all that peer review they do on the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, she's part of the peer review process. Yeah.
Okay, so this Lancet article studied 16 to 25-year-olds in 10 countries and reported 59% were very or extremely worried about climate change, and 84% were at least moderately worried. 45% claimed they were so worried that they struggled to function on a daily basis, the definition of an anxiety disorder. So, she basically calls these folks losers and weak and snowflakes and all that, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so she sees this evidence that's presented. This was a study of 10,000 people, by the way. It wasn't
10
like
countries.
a little.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, 10,000 people
It's
in
a
10
lot of work
countries.
went into this,
right?
yeah.
And she's like,
Yeah, these people, no justification.
They're just wimps or something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, the reason I brought up Baghdad Bob is literally Baghdad Bob came to my mind when I read that piece from her.
That's a good thing to come
because great thing. Because it feels like such an extreme form of denialism.
Yes.
And I have a hypothesis for you guys, which is I sadly suspect that we will see more of this kind of... I mean, we've seen all kinds of denialism, right? That the Wall Street Journal in particular has been really great at propagating over the years around climate science. And she even does that in this piece, right? The beginning, she talks about the climate science isn't even really solid.
Right.
But I feel like we might be entering a new era of denialism, right? Which is like the worse things get, the more some people will fall to an extreme of absolutely lambasting those positions, those concerns, or just like whistling past the graveyard, or I don't know what it is.
I want to mark this point in history for historians. Okay, I'm gonna call mark time. So whenever this podcast release, and we're gonna mark the time here, because we'll look back on this, and this will be called the Miller paradox after you.
Oh.
Yes, I think so.
Oh, my work is done.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it won't do any good, but
Right, that's right.
it will be called the Miller paradox.
It seems like, I mean, she's attacking the very idea of climate grief, where we can't be sure she might be in it. Like, that's why she's denying it, because that's the first stage
Denial.
of grief, right?
I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
look, she gets paid. She's on the editorial board of Wall Street Journal. The editorial board has always taken the most extreme views. I mean, the Wall Street Journal has actually done good journalism.
There's some real
over the
reporters
years.
there, for
Do you know what I mean? But like, the board has always taken this
They're all
super
it's
pro
awful.
industry, you know. So I'm sure she, you know, it's a little bit like that adage: you don't go against what your salary.
Don't bite the hand that feeds, or something like that.
whatever.
There's one. I mean, that's a good one, right?
So, but I do suspect, I have to say, that there is a form of psychological denial on her part.
Well, it's nice of you to call it the Miller paradox, Jason, because I think we could actually call it the diamond paradox.
Oh,
That sounds better.
You
I
do
know, that's a
recall
better
Diamond
name.
Paradox is like a good movie name.
yeah, it's way better.
Yeah.
like Tom Cruise in the
Diamond
Diamond Paradox.
Yeah.
Or it's a Hardy Boys title.
What's the Hardy Boys?
You don't know the Hardy Boys?
No.
Okay.
But it's so old. Come
Okay,
on.
sorry.
Let's talk about a cultural reference.
That
Bring
freaks-
up the Hardy
that
Boys.
freaks
Nancy,
me
you gotta
out for a
say
second.
Nancy Drew.
Nancy
You
Drew.
gotta say
Right,
Nancy
yeah, come in, we're equal opportunity adolescent
Yeah,
detective
mysteries.
book
They're great.
provider.
I preferred Encyclopedia Brown myself.
Oh.
But,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, the Diamond Paradox is from Jared Diamond, of course, the author of Guns, Germs, and Steel and Collapse. I remember one time when we were recording this podcast, Jason, you were using Collapse as a coaster for your beer.
That's right.
Which I thought was very apt for the topics we consider here. But anyway, in Collapse, Jared Diamond talked about how people who live at the base of a dam or below a dam, they tend to discount the risk of that dam collapsing.
The dam can never
wiping
fail.
out their
It
whole
is the
town.
perfect dam.
Right, the closer they are to the
Yeah.
dam, the less concern they express.
They have no concern
Right.
absolutely at all.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, that thing's tough. It's made of concrete.
Yes.
You know?
Yep.
Right,
It's
and
incredible.
that's my point, is that the closer we get to the real consequences of climate breakdown, I feel like the more we're going to see this kind of a reaction. Maybe not with the same ridicule, but...
So yeah, so what is this coming? So I think there's a couple things, there's a couple hypotheses to explain this poor woman's behavior. Okay, if she's a human being and she,
Are you doing this whole empathy gambit for Melody here, so she actually thinks like you're a nice guy? Is it only because she's in the room?
Oh,
I
wow.
hope
It's
not.
really schmaltzy. It would not work.
Personally, I want you to stop right now. If you could just stop.
Well, so here's the thing. I don't want to say anything mean because I could go in
Really?
a really dark direction, right? Because this was a tough piece to read. It's so bad, and you just.
Tell me you were not pissed when you read it.
I was pissed.
Yeah.
I was pissed. Okay, so but so what I think of myself is not what's wrong with her, but what happened to her.
Right. What's wrong with us?
Okay, what happened to her? Something happened to her that made her this way.
Yeah,
Yeah, she got a big fat check.
Exactly. They paid her $1 million to
You got a
write this
bonus.
shit.
Okay, so is this just gaslighting behavior from the Wall Street Journal that
Yes.
pays her?
Yeah.
Is this something personally that is in her where she is in psychological denial of what's going on? Because acknowledging this would expose something that would threaten her identity, right? Her paradigm. Neoclassical economics, neoliberalism, the market solves things. When we have the greatest market failure of all time here, potentially, right? So So I want to talk about not just her though, because that's what maybe we can set her aside. She's important, but she's not that important. And let's move on, okay, to what's going on within the climate concerned community about how to deal with this, because the article, she writes this article dismissing all these data about the anxiety that's being felt, the existential threat. So let's talk about that.
So you're saying we're not going to join her. We're not going to just dismiss out of hand that anybody who's worried about the climate has a mental illness. We're not doing that?
No, I think maybe I want her to reflect upon herself and wonder if she has a mental illness. But I'm not so worried about the people who are worried about climate.
Can I just say how weird this all is coming from a podcast called Crazy Town? Like, we're not talking about mental illness here.
Yeah, we're such ableists.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so you bring up something I think that is interesting, Jason, which is whether she's gaslighting or this is a form of her own denialism. She actually is providing evidence of an experience that people are having, right? Which is forms of climate anxiety. I mean, I think we all know people in our lives. We experience it probably to some degree ourselves, right? Yeah. I got to tell you, looking at the window right now, it's a little fucked up to be able to look at the sun. And that's because
the light's so scattered. Well, it's beautifully scattered today.
It was actually the smell that alarmed me, because it smells like a campfire outside. You open the door and you're like, wow, I feel like I'm literally around a fire. And I don't know how many hundreds of miles away the fire actually is, but clearly in effect.
Yeah, it's not just the young people who are upset, right? I mean, the study we're talking about is these young people. I have a friend I had lunch with today, and she said that she doesn't have time to think about this stuff during the day. She's busy, right? She's doing her life. She's working and she's dealing with her kids, but she wakes up at night. Every night. And I'm like, you got to deal with this in the daytime to some extent so you can sleep, right? So a lot of people are very upset. And when stuff like this happens, the fires, I mean, we've had actually a beautiful summer in Oregon until now. I've been looking across the nation going, oh my God, this is horrible. But I feel like I've been spared. And then suddenly like, nope, not yet.
It is actually an interesting thing about that. If by the end of the summer you could sort of say, well, every region got hit. You know what I mean? There is no safe space.
There's nothing. Everything. The Pacific Northwest was this island of like, it's fine.
Although, as I said, Melody, you just came from Austin. And my mom lives in Austin. My sister lives in Austin. And
Alex Jones lives in Austin.
Well, that's the main reason. I check my 10-day forecast of Austin every day. And it's like 80 for a low and 104 for a high, and it's been that way for a couple of months.
Well, that's the thing that's interesting. At first, it was like, oh my gosh, this crazy event. And now it's just a season. Yeah. Oh, it's wildfire season. Right. Oh, it's not a hurricane, it's hurricane season.
Right.
We call it in Austin summer, where it's just over 100 degrees. And that's a denial, or like it's really just a coping mechanism, right? Like, we're always trying to find some sort of homeostasis. Yeah. And so even as things keep getting crazier and crazier, we're like, okay, okay, now I have a word for that. It's just a season. Oh, yeah. If I hunker down,
right,
and then it'll be better.
This episode brought to you by summer.
But actually, the Wall Street Journal writer, that's what she said.
Right, she said,
oh, this is all get normalized, and people get used to it, and then they won't be so anxious.
We always adapt.
We always adapt. It's all good.
Yeah.
We could definitely adapt to,
we're gonna be like
160-degree wet bulb.
we're gonna be like thermophilic bacteria coming out of the volcanic vents. We can last.
Well, I want to get back to what I felt like you were getting at, Jason, which was, okay, so let's forget her in terms of her dismissal of climate anxiety and acknowledge that this is a real thing. We experience it. People we know experience it. That study shows that young people in particular are experiencing it. And that there is kind of a debate within the climate community around not so much how to deal with this, but around communicating and talking about how dire the situation is. Is that what you were trying to get at?
I was thinking more like, I guess I think it's pretty dire. I've already accepted that. So I'm not coming from the point of view of how do we communicate to the public, which I think is another good question to ask. I was more coming from like, how should we process the direness of the situation so we can not necessarily be okay with it, but in a sense be functional and respond in ways that maybe make it less dire. There's different degrees of direness. And the difference between, say, 2 degrees Celsius and 5 degrees Celsius is tremendous, right? Like the amount of complex life that persists on the planet is vastly different in those two different scenarios. So I almost think like what we need is people to be able to find a way to still keep working towards a better world, better outcomes, even though they're going to be facing all kinds of horrors. So how do you remain functional when you can see the horrors that are coming?
But I think exactly what you bring up is the reason why this debate is happening within the climate community, and it's important to talk about, because you talked about the difference between 2 degrees and 5 degrees, right?
Yeah.
We're still hopefully, I think a lot of people are still fighting to try to keep things to below 2 degrees, 1.5.
Right.
However optimistic or pessimistic they are about the prospects of achieving that, we know there's a big difference. Whatever it is, even a tenth of a degree makes a difference.
Right? Yes, you should fight for every tenth of a degree.
So I think that there are people who are expressing concern about public declarations of how bad it is, how bad things might get, which those declarations may be just people's expression of their anxiety, of their concern, of their processing. But there are people who are reacting against that. And I think it is interesting to sort of look at what's happening in that debate, because we have people that are really well respected who've kind of been pushing against what they consider to be climate
alarmism or doomerism.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're not talking about the right-wing denialists. You're talking about people in our camp.
Yeah. So, for example, Michael Mann, very highly respected climate scientist, right? Who's been very vocal about this. Rebecca Solnit, who's an amazing author who's covered a lot of really important topics. She just wrote a piece in The Guardian and about this very issue, and she titled it "We Can't Afford to Be Climate Doomers."
I mean, there's a full thing, like there's a McPherson level of doomism, and then there's like
refer to our episode on Guy McPherson.
Yeah.
He says we're all going to be dead 3 years from now.
Right.
Human extinction.
We all died yesterday.
Yeah. So that obviously that's absurd, but there's also probably levels that she's talking about that so I'm kind of curious.
I think it's not just the Guy McPhersons that they're reacting to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they are reacting to discussion that is about kind of how bad the situation is from people that are not near-term extinctionists,
And we see this with our allies. I mean, Peter Kalmus is close to us. He's a climate scientist, and he's got an unbelievable level of climate anxiety based on the scientific research that he does, to the point where he's become a climate activist. And he's chaining himself to the door of the private airline, terminal at the airport. He's chaining himself to the investment bank office that's supplying money to fossil fuels. I mean, that's a level of anxiety that I haven't reached yet.
But I think you bring up a key point, which is it's anxiety combined with action.
Yeah, it's crippling anxiety or productive anxiety.
And I think that's so the concern here. I'll just quote Rebecca Solnit's piece.
Okay.
She wrote, "Some days I think that if we lose the climate battle, it will be due in no small part to this defeatism among the comfortable in the global north, while people in frontline communities continue to fight like hell for survival, which is why fighting defeatism is also climate work." Mm-hmm. And I don't think she's just referring to Guy McPherson. I think she's reacting to a concern that she has, that people are expressing how bad the situation is, right? How concerned that they are, the trajectory that we're going on, and seeing that as defeatism, right?
I think it can be both.
So that's the thing is, you talked about Peter Kalmus, Rob, as an example of this. Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, they conducted a survey back in December of 2022 of Americans, and they found that, and I'm quoting here, Americans who had experienced at least one feature of climate distress were much more likely than those who had not to say that they had taken different forms of climate action.
Well, that's good because we're all experiencing it now.
Okay, so this is the line that she's worried about. When you are distressed and anxious, do you go hedonistic or denialist? Do you just like nah, or just say party on? We have nothing. There's nothing we
Or
can do.
maybe it's neither of those. Maybe
Or
it's
depressed.
depressed and inactive.
All of those are three different emotional reactions you could have.
Right.
I can see that. Or are you more likely to say like, I'm afraid, but I actually am going to get my butt into gear. I'm going to do something. This is what I feel like. But maybe it's just different personalities, right? I don't know what the right answer is. Somebody should do some sort of general survey of humans for like their five personality traits or whatever, and what's the most likely direction someone might go. I mean, if we can target messaging to individuals on Facebook and on YouTube, maybe we can target the messaging. I mean, that's ridiculous. Of course we can't. But
my guess is like the survey that was done by Yale, I don't think that they just happened to survey more people who are a certain personality type.
Right.
I think that their argument is that being distressed and being concerned leads you to take more action.
Well, that's what the stress and concern is for. It evolved, so we do something. This is why people are anxious, because anxiety is like, okay, there's a problem here. There's like something going on. There's something I need to resolve. I'm going to take an action to relieve the anxiety. And if it's functional, it actually relieves the anxiety because something happened that improved the situation. The problem, of course, with climate change is it's so big that are you on this treadmill where almost nothing you can do is ever going to resolve it. And this is where I think we have to be clever in some way and maybe trick our brains to some extent into having some way of both accepting that we may not have enough influence to make enough difference, or that we will never know if we're going to make enough difference. Like, we have to live with that uncertainty. But is it worth fighting for each 1/10 of a degree? Well, if you love the planet and you want complex life to persist as best it can, then I say, yeah, you should do that.
I think a lot of people don't know what that fight looks like. And I think my hypothesis, if you will, is that part of the despair is that there isn't a consensus. I mean, there is a scientific consensus, but I'm thinking myself as like a teenager, right? You're scrolling on your phone, you're down the climate rabbit hole, and then you see an article like this, and then you see politicians being like, oh, you know what? We are going to try to get some electric cars.
Inflation reduction.
You know what? We're not going to have any plastic straws anymore, guys. So we are on it. And a young person doesn't have power. I mean, I'm 33 and I feel like I'm waiting until I can have like maybe some power someday.
Like people like me die.
Yeah, like once you die off, maybe I'll get some freaking power around here.
Sure.
I hope you get more power than what Jason got.
Jason, you're so powerful.
No, but there is that, like, you are born into a society that has set up things in a certain way, and that society is like, okay, yes, it's on the one hand really bad, or on the other hand, not bad at all. And so I think that that's causing some of that cognitive dissonance and depression, where you're like, okay, well, what can I actually do?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ro.
Well, I was just going to say, let's make that turn. Let's talk about what we could do to process grief and deal with it in a productive way.
I think it might be not seeing these as distinct areas of focus. And by these things, I mean the emotional side and the action side, right? So we came up with this kind of term, acceptance and agency, a couple years ago, because what we're trying to do at Post-Carbon, we were organizing a conference at the time, and we were looking for people who straddled that kind of complex middle of accepting the true nature of the predicament that we're facing and owning the feelings that might come up out of that and the uncertainty and all that stuff, and at the same time still feeling agency over it. And a lot of times people go to denialism because they can't accept it, can't process it or whatever, or they come to a place where maybe they have processed it and they see how bad the situation is, and then they become fatalistic, and so they have no agency. But if we look at those things as together, in some ways as reinforcing, right? So for us to be able to own our feelings, process what we're dealing with, our grief, our anxiety, to not feel alone with those emotions, to recognize that that's going to be part of our journey. And we could talk about resources for being able to do that, leads us to maybe being more motivated, more able to take action. And the more action that we take, maybe that helps us actually not alleviate, but address and somehow be able to process and deal with our complex emotions. And it's going to be probably a tumultuous sort of, you're never going to be in a perfect spot of kind of synergy sitting in that, space of like, I'm fully in acceptance and fully have full agency, but going back and forth between them, and that they're reinforcing on some level if we're working on both things. Yeah. Right?
Well, if one thing can save us, it's synergy.
Synergy. I know. So me pulling out the business speak. Right? Yeah. Synergy. It's a win-win, everybody.
I'm always questioning how much you are supposed to look at the climate predicament or the biodiversity predicament or any of these existential crises that we're facing.
The Pac-12 just fell apart.
Right.
Don't talk about that. It's too painful.
Yeah.
But, well, you could talk about that from a climate perspective. Really? We're going to have West Coast teams flying to the middle of the country to play games?
Right.
Anyway.
Did anyone bring that up in a meeting?
You think a single person brought that up?
I want to know.
What are the environmental impacts of us getting rid of these regional... Yeah.
Does our water polo team really need to do this?
Yeah, I was thinking about like the Tiddlywinks team at Oregon is going to fly to Michigan to
Tiddlywinks team. The Frisbee golf team.
Right. But I've wondered this a lot. I mean, you can read, watch documentaries, talk to jackasses like you guys, and you get pretty damn depressed by, or you just open the window, right? And smell the air. And I'm wondering in this idea of seeing all that and trying to process his grief, like what's the amount that we should be doing that? What's a healthy level of distraction?
3¼ cups.
Right, exactly. Like I've told you guys.
That's a lot of alcohol.
Well, I mean, I've told you.
It's beer. Okay.
I've told you guys a bunch of times, like my retreat is go out into nature and frolic, right? Go ride a mountain bike on a trail or whatever.
It's burning.
Kind of hard to do that. You're going to go out there right now?
I know, it's a detriment to my health to go and do that right now. And I've told you too, I've had that vision where I was like mountain biking with my daughter on a beautiful day. We were having fun. And I was thinking, this is all going to burn next year. And just like literally picturing it as a charred forest. Yeah. So I think obviously this is real. Obviously it's based on the scientific facts as much as our Wall Street Journal articles want to say otherwise. So the question then is, when you're feeling that, when you have it, what's the best way to get that agency that you're talking about, Asher?
I'm sorry to say, I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all for everybody. I mean, I do think, I appreciate you actually bringing up the topic of distraction, because I also feel like, I'll give you like a little analogy that just popped in my head, which is, when I was young, I just graduated college, my first sort of job out of school was working at the Shoah Foundation, which I probably talked about before. We were interviewing Holocaust survivors, and it really felt like a race against time before they passed away. And we really saw that as our mission. And then when you hear the stories of what these people suffer through, which is still to me kind of inconceivable, I was working 14-hour days, 7 days a week. I was in my early 20s, and I was not taking care of myself.
Yeah. Methamphetamine's amazing. What a look.
It was caffeine for me. I was on a lot of caffeine. But I didn't eat very much. I did not take care of myself. And I told myself, well, what am I complaining about? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's absurd for me.
Compared to the stories you're hearing.
Why it's selfish of me to take care of myself or whatever. Right. Do you know what I mean? So you bring up distractions or other coping mechanisms. I think it's important for us to acknowledge, because if we say, hey, I'm trying to look square on at what we're facing here, I can't afford, to have distractions, watch Netflix and do whatever it is.
How selfish of me to stream a video.
But But we do have to care for ourselves. And so I think caring for ourselves maybe looks different for different people, and maybe at different times it is different. So this is maybe thinking about resilience, right? One of the properties of resilience is diversity, right? So if you think about a diversity of approaches and how you build your own resilience and take care of yourself, and maybe some days when it's beautiful outside, Rob, you go out in nature and you ride your bike. Right. Maybe not today, right? So you have another option for today, and that's shoot heroin.
yeah. Comfortably numb, baby.
A lot of the time, the juxtaposition, though, is like thinking about this and then doing self-care. And I think there's the other thing, which is being part of a community, going out and being part of the thing that you're trying to save. It's volunteering or doing something for others, because I think the self-care thing has become a trope as well. Yeah. And thinking about yourself all the time is horrible. I mean, talk about anxiety. Oh my God. Like, I'm around me all the time.
Yeah, I know.
But like,
and you're a nice person.
You hardly ever write Wall Street Journal articles.
How do we know
we
that's
never
not her pen
print them. No, but that self-care can also be contributing to something else, going and being a part of something else. That they're usually put in different categories, right? Like you're volunteering or you're doing self-care. And I think that those can be combined.
I agree. That's a really good point.
Well, and let's talk also about just countering this bullshit. I mean, we have an advisor at PCI, Leslie Davenport, who is a psychotherapist and deals a lot with people who have climate anxiety issues and is trying to help them work through it. And she's got a response to this article, right? And this is real. We need to face it. We need to deal with it. There are methods and clinical tools we can use, but yes, people need to remain functional in the face of a real disaster that they're responding to in a logical way. And it's good to see people like Leslie, and there are a lot of others too, who are painting a realistic picture of what's happening rather than the denialism that you see in the mainstream media.
I think there are more therapists that are like trying to learn about this, right, and get training in it even as
Yeah, I mean, so that's actually one of the things that Leslie is a psychotherapist, and she's really helping lead a charge, I think, sort of a new movement within the community to try to arm and train and support therapists to provide that kind of support for their clients. And so there's actually something called the Climate Psychology Alliance. They are, they have a directory of therapists who are climate aware. I think that directory is growing over time. There's trainings that are happening for therapists who are looking to, to be more skilled in supporting, clients in that. There are things like the Good Grief Network, which is an online community of people who are trying to process things. There's the work of Britt Ray and others at Generation Dread, Gen Dread. They have a Substack where they write about stuff.
Oh yeah, good article on that recently by this physician.
Yeah,
that I really like.
He was talking about his process. So there are more and more resources for this stuff, and I really resonate with what you just said, Melody, around self-care is not just an isolated activity. Self-care is about being in community, and that's another thing that we were conditioned as a species to do. And Danny Sellermeyer, who we have interviewed before for this podcast on multi-species justice, wrote a piece actually also in the Guardian recently, talking about her dread and her grief and fear of the coming summer in Australia. Because they're anticipating another, after they had these devastating fires, black fires in 2019, and she was directly in the crosshairs of the fires and trying to save all these other species and beings that she cohabits with. And then they had years of flooding, which was also pretty devastating. Now they're looking back at the situation of fires, and she's got all this dread anticipating this. And something she wrote that I think is really, really profound to me. And she wrote, "The truth is that this summer and the summers to come will bring extreme heat and fires, the extent of which we cannot yet know. But the truth is also that there's so much we can collectively be doing to ease the burden for all Earth beings as we move into that future. As counterintuitive as it may sound, looking at our predicament square in the eye, and then in the face of what we see, organizing and acting collectively, politically and practically with a view to caring for the planet that is our earthly home is the only way through climate dread." Mm-hmm. So if she could do that, considering what she's gone through, I think we could do it too.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks for listening. We just gave you a whole bunch of do the opposite ideas so you can take action in your life and community. If that's too much at this time in your life, do something real simple. Give us a 5-star rating on Spotify or any other podcast app and hit the share button to let your friends know about Crazy Town.